My husband introduced me as his roommate and told his company he was single. I showed him I can be single too. For 3 years, my husband Blake never once introduced me as his wife. Not once. We'd meet his coworkers at restaurants. This is Rachel. Just Rachel. Never my wife Rachel. Never even my partner Rachel. Just Rachel. Like I was some random person who happened to be there. At his company holiday party last December, his boss asked how we knew each other. Blake said we were roommates. Roommates. We've been married 4 years. I corrected him immediately. Actually, we're married. Blake laughed it off. She means we live together. It feels like marriage sometimes. His boss looked confused but moved on. In the car, I lost it. Why did you say we're roommates? It's complicated. The company culture is weird about married guys. They think single men work harder, stay later, travel more. That's idiotic. You wear a wedding ring. I take it off at work. He showed me his jacket pocket. His ring was there. I started paying attention after that. January, we ran into his college friends at a bar. This is Rachel. She's a friend from the neighborhood. February, his brother visited with his new girlfriend. Blake introduced me as his girlfriend. Not wife. Girlfriend. Even his brother looked shocked. March was the breaking point. Blake got promoted to regional manager. Big raise. Corner office. The announcement email went out to the whole company. Congratulations to Blake Fordham on his promotion. As one of our most dedicated single employees, Blake exemplifies the availability and flexibility we value. Single employee. It was in writing. I called Blake at work. Did you tell them we're divorced? No, I just never corrected their assumption. We've been married 4 years. You've worked there for 2. How is that an assumption? Look, once I get established in this role, I'll tell them. It's just easier this way for now. Easier for who? April. I decided to test something. I showed up at his office with lunch. Told the receptionist I was his wife. She looked confused. Blake isn't married. He's single. Check your records. I'm his emergency contact. She checked. You're listed as Rachel, neighbor. That night, I asked Blake about it. If I die at work, they'll call you. What does it matter what label they use? It matters because I'm your wife. Not your neighbor. Not your roommate. Your wife. He promised to fix it. He didn't. May, I found out something interesting. Blake's company had an internal social network. Like Facebook, but for employees. Blake's profile said single. His relationship status wasn't just hidden. It actively said single. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was his activity on there. Comments on female coworkers' posts. Flirty messages. Nothing explicit, but definitely not how married men should talk. Hey, beautiful. Great presentation today. Looking gorgeous in that dress, Lindsay. Drinks after work? Just us? I confronted him. It's harmless. Just building rapport with the team. Building rapport? You told Lindsay she looked gorgeous. Lindsay is our biggest client liaison. I need her on my side. By pretending you're single? June, I stopped wearing my wedding ring too. Blake noticed immediately. Where's your ring? Same place as yours when you're at work. That's different. How? If you're single at work, I'm single everywhere. That's ridiculous. You're being petty. No, I'm being consistent. If we're not married in your professional life, why should we be married in mine? July, his company had their summer picnic. Families were invited. Blake told me not to come. It would be awkward. People think I'm single. So tell them you're not. I will. After the next quarter. I need this bonus. The bonus depends on you being single? No, but relationships complicate things. My boss went through a divorce. He favors single employees now. He thinks they're more focused. I went to the picnic anyway. Not as Blake's wife. As a potential client. I told the receptionist I was considering hiring their firm. She let me right in. Blake was playing volleyball with Lindsay. She was wearing a bikini top. He had his shirt off. They were partners against another couple. They looked like a couple themselves. After they won, Lindsay hugged him. He spun her around. His actual boss, Carl, was watching them with approval. I walked over to Carl. Hi, I'm Rachel Fordham. I'm considering hiring your firm. Carl's face lit up. Fordham? Any relation to Blake? He's my husband. Carl's expression changed completely. Blake's married? Blake saw me then. His face went white. Rachel. What are you doing here? Supporting my husband at his company event. Why wouldn't I be here? Lindsay looked between us. You're married? To her? 3 years. Together for 6? Blake tried to salvage it. We're separated. Actually working through some things. No, we're not. We live together. Share bank accounts. File taxes jointly. Very much married. Carl pulled Blake aside. They talked for 10 minutes. Blake came back furious. He caught me in the parking lot before I could get to my car. His face was red. Not just pink from the sun, but actually red like he'd been holding his breath. He grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? Why would you do that to me? I pulled my arm back. Do what? Tell the truth? You humiliated me. In front of my boss. In front of everyone. I opened my car door. You humiliated yourself. I just showed up. He blocked the door. You know what you did? You ruined everything. 3 years of work. Gone. I got in the car anyway, had to push past him a little. You spent 3 years lying. That's what ruined it. He was still talking when I closed the door, yelling something about how I never understood anything. I started the engine. He hit the window with his palm. Rachel, we need to talk about this. I backed out while he was still standing there. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. I didn't go home. I went to Heather's apartment across town, the one with the blue door and the broken doorbell. I had to knock 3 times before she answered. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. What happened? I tried to explain, but it came out wrong, all jumbled. The picnic and Carl and Lindsay in her bikini top and Blake's face going white. Heather disappeared into the kitchen and came back with wine and 2 glasses. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told her about December when Blake called me his roommate, about January and February and March, about the email that said single employee, about showing up at his office and being listed as neighbor, about the internal social network and the flirty comments, about June when I stopped wearing my ring too. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she poured more wine. 3 years? I nodded. 3 years of this? I've been such an idiot. She shook her head hard. Number. He's the idiot. You're the one who finally did something about it. But I should have done something sooner. Maybe. But you did it now. That's what matters. My phone started ringing. Blake's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Heather grabbed it and turned off the sound. You don't have to deal with him tonight. The phone lit up 17 times over the next few hours. 17 calls. I gave in and listened to the first voicemail around 9. Rachel, you need to come home so we can talk about this like adults. The second one at 9:15. I can't believe you would betray me like this. After everything I've done for you. The third one at 9:30. Carl is going to fire me. Do you understand that? My career is over because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I handed the phone to Heather. She listened to the 4th message and deleted it without playing it for me. You don't need to hear any more of these tonight. But what if something's actually wrong? Then he can call 911 like everyone else. You need sleep. We made up the couch with blankets and pillows. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my phone buzz on the kitchen counter. Heather came out once around midnight. Still awake? Can't stop thinking. About what? About how I didn't see it. How I let it happen for so long. She sat on the edge of the couch. You saw it. That's why you went to the picnic, I guess. You made a choice today. Remember that. She went back to bed. My phone buzzed 3 more times before I finally fell asleep. The next morning I drove home around 8. Blake's car was already gone. He'd left for work without waiting for me, probably trying to do damage control like he said. The apartment felt different. Colder, maybe. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with our file box of important documents. Bank statements first. We had 2 joint checking accounts and 1 savings. My paycheck went into one checking account, his went into the other. The savings had about $8,000. I pulled out the car lease, both our names. 2 years left on it. The apartment lease, both our names. 14 months left. I found our tax returns from last year, filed jointly. Our health insurance cards. I was on his plan through work. My emergency contact form from my job. Blake's name and number. His emergency contact form that listed me as neighbor. I put that one aside. Credit cards. We had 3. 2 were joint accounts. 1 was just in my name, but Blake was an authorized user. I started making lists. Things that would need to change. Bank accounts to separate, lease to break or someone to move out, car lease to deal with, insurance to figure out. By noon, I had 4 pages of notes and a headache. Everything was connected. 4 years of building a life together meant 4 years of tangled finances and shared responsibilities. I couldn't just walk away. It would take months to untangle all of this. Blake came home at 6 looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His tie was loose and his shirt was wrinkled. He dropped his briefcase by the door. We need to talk. I stayed at the table with my lists. Okay. He sat down across from me. Carl pulled me into his office first thing this morning. What did you tell him? Blake rubbed his face. I tried to explain that it was complicated, that we were having problems, that you showed up without warning. He wouldn't listen. He wanted to know why I lied about being married. What did you say? That it was a misunderstanding. That I never actually said I was single. Carl said that's not what it looked like. He said everyone at the company thinks I'm single because I told them I was single. Blake's voice got louder. He said lying about your marital status shows bad character. He said if I'll lie about that, what else will I lie about? I picked up my pen. What else did he say? That he's watching me now. That my judgment is in question. That several people who saw what happened at the picnic have been asking questions. Blake stood up and started pacing. Jeremy came up to me in the break room and said he always thought it was weird that I acted single. Lindsay won't even look at me. Everyone's treating me like I did something wrong. You did do something wrong. That's not the point. I asked him what he meant by that's not the point. He stopped pacing. The point is you destroyed my reputation. You came to my workplace and exposed me in front of everyone. I closed the file box. I told Carl I was your wife. That's the truth. You made me look like a liar. You are a liar. You told your company you were single for 2 years. He slammed his hand on the table. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I didn't tell them I was single. I just didn't correct them when they assumed. Blake, your profile literally said single. That was just the default setting. You commented on Lindsay's posts calling her beautiful. That was networking. You told Carl's assistant I was your neighbor. That was easier than explaining. I stood up. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear how many excuses you're making? I'm not making excuses. I'm explaining the situation. There's a difference. Number. There really isn't. He followed me into the living room. You don't understand corporate culture. You don't understand how things work at my level. Carl favors single guys. Everyone knows that. He thinks married men are less committed, less available. So you erased me to get ahead. I did what I had to do, and now you're paying for it. He got in front of me. I'm paying for what you did. You're the one who showed up at the picnic. You're the one who told Carl. I wouldn't have had to tell Carl anything if you'd been honest from the start. That's easy for you to say. You don't have career pressure like I do. My promotion depended on Carl seeing me as dedicated, as someone willing to put work first. I sat on the couch. And being married means you can't put work first? In Carl's eyes, yes. So for 3 years you pretended I didn't exist. I didn't pretend you didn't exist. I just kept work and home separate. By calling me your neighbor, by taking off your ring, by flirting with Lindsay. Those were all necessary. For what? For my career. For our future. For the life I'm trying to build for us. I looked at him. You mean the life you're trying to build for yourself? We fought for 2 hours. Blake kept insisting he'd done what he had to do for career advancement. I kept pointing out that plenty of married people advance in their careers without lying. He said I was being naive about corporate politics. I said he was being disrespectful about our marriage. He said Carl's generation thinks differently about these things. I said that didn't make it okay. He said I was selfish for not understanding. I said he was selfish for erasing me. We went in circles. At some point, I realized we weren't even arguing about the same thing anymore. He was defending his career choices. I was talking about basic respect. He genuinely believed his ambition justified what he'd done. That getting ahead at work was more important than acknowledging his wife. That his professional image mattered more than my existence. I sat there looking at him and understood something I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't going to get better. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He thought I was the problem for not going along with it. That gap between us felt impossible to cross. I told him I was going back to Heather's for a few days. His face changed. You're leaving? Just for a few days. While we both cool down. You can't leave. We need to work this out. I need space. Blake moved toward me. Space? We're married. We work through things together. We've been working through things for 3 years. Or I have. While you worked on your career? That's not fair. None of this is fair. I went to the bedroom and started packing a bag. He stood in the doorway. How long? I don't know. A few days, maybe a week. A week? Rachel, that's not cooling down. That's leaving. I packed my toothbrush and face wash. Call it whatever you want. Please don't do this. I zipped the bag. I have to. He grabbed my arm again, gentler this time. I love you. Do you? Because you have a funny way of showing it. I do. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. How? By you finally telling people at work you're married? I already did. Carl knows now. Everyone knows. Only because I forced it. That doesn't count. What do you want from me? I want you to understand why this hurt me. I do understand. No, you don't. You think I'm being dramatic. You think I should have just gone along with your plan? He let go of my arm. Fine. Run away. That's what you always do when things get hard. I picked up my bag. And you always blame me when your choices have consequences. Heather let me in without questions. She'd made up the couch again and had coffee ready. We sat in her living room and I pulled out my laptop. What are you doing? Research. On what? Divorce. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just moved closer so she could see the screen too. I started with basics. How to file for divorce in our state. Grounds for divorce. No fault versus fault-based. Our state allowed no-fault divorce based on living separately for 6 months or irreconcilable differences. I clicked through to a legal aid website. It explained asset division, debt division, lease obligations, insurance changes. The process looked long and complicated and expensive. Heather pointed at the screen. You need a lawyer. I know. Do you know any? She pulled out her phone. My cousin used someone good. Let me get the name. I kept reading. Filing fees, court dates, mediation requirements, waiting periods. Everything took time. Everything cost money. Even if Blake agreed to everything, we were looking at months of paperwork and court appearances. If he fought it, it could take over a year. Heather came back with a name written on paper. Cornelius Vance. My cousin said he's expensive but worth it. I took the paper. How expensive? A few thousand, probably. Maybe more if it gets complicated. I thought about our savings account. $8,000. Half of that was mine. $4,000. Enough to get started. Heather squeezed my shoulder. You okay? Number. But I will be. She nodded. Yeah. You will. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls from Blake and a long email waiting in my inbox. The subject line said I'm sorry, and I almost deleted it without reading. But Heather was still asleep on the couch and I had nothing else to do, so I opened it. The email went on for pages. Blake apologized for getting angry at the picnic and for how he handled everything with Carl. He said he'd already told Carl the complete truth about our marriage and promised he would introduce me properly to everyone at work from now on. He wanted to fix this. He wanted us to work. He loved me and he knew he'd messed up, but he could change. I read through all of it twice and felt nothing except tired. I'd seen this pattern before. After the holiday party when I corrected him about us being married, he'd apologized and promised to be better. After I found out he was listed as single on the company network, he'd apologized and promised to fix it. After every incident where I pushed back on being erased, Blake would apologize and promise change, and things would improve for maybe 2 weeks before sliding back to the same disrespect. The apology never addressed the real problem, which was that Blake didn't actually respect me enough to acknowledge my existence when it might cost him something professionally. I closed the email without responding and started searching for divorce lawyers. Heather had given me a name the night before. Cornelius Vance. I found his website and filled out the contact form requesting a meeting. His assistant called back within an hour and scheduled me for that afternoon. The office was downtown in a building with marble floors and too much air conditioning. Cornelius was maybe 50 with gray hair and a kind face that had probably seen every terrible thing people do to each other in marriages. I sat across from him and told the whole story. 3 years of being introduced as just Rachel, the roommate comment at the holiday party, being listed as his neighbor on emergency contacts, the single status on his work profile, the flirty messages to Lindsay, the company picnic where I finally forced the truth out. Cornelius listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. Your husband's behavior is deeply hurtful and shows a fundamental lack of respect, but I need to be honest with you about what that means legally. In our state, we don't really do fault-based divorce anymore. What he did doesn't constitute adultery or abuse or any of the traditional grounds. We'd be looking at a no-fault divorce based on living separately or irreconcilable differences. I nodded. I'd read enough online to expect this. So it doesn't matter that he lied about being married for 3 years? It matters to you, and it should matter to him. But it doesn't change the legal process or the outcome. We'll divide your assets and debts according to state law. If you own property together, we'll figure out who keeps what or sell it and split the proceeds. Same with bank accounts, retirement funds, any debts you've accumulated. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started making a list. Tell me what you own together. I went through it all. We rented an apartment with 6 months left on the lease. We had a joint checking account with about $8,000, a savings account with another $12,000, a car lease in both our names with 2 years remaining, credit card debt of about $5,000 split between 2 cards. No kids, no house, no complicated investments. Cornelius wrote it all down and nodded. This is actually pretty straightforward compared to most divorces I handle. The lease is the trickiest part. You'll either need to both move out and pay the early termination fee, or one of you stays and the landlord agrees to remove the other person from the lease. The car lease will need to be refinanced in one person's name, or you'll need to buy it out early. Joint accounts get closed and the money divided. Debt gets split unless you can prove one person was solely responsible. He looked up from his notes. Even if your husband cooperates fully and agrees to everything, this process takes time. We're looking at several months minimum to get everything properly separated. and the divorce finalized. If he fights any part of it, we could be dealing with this for a year or more. How much will it cost? My retainer is $3,000. That covers the initial filing and basic negotiations. If things get complicated or contested, you'll need to pay additional fees. Most divorces I handle run between $5,000 and $10,000 total in legal costs. I thought about the $4,000 that was technically my half of our savings. It would barely cover getting started. But staying married to someone who erased me felt more expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. I told Cornelius I needed a day to think about it, and he said that was fine. Take your time. This is a big decision. I drove back to the apartment because I needed clothes and my work laptop. Blake's car wasn't in the parking lot, so I figured I was safe. But when I opened the door, the smell of lasagna hit me immediately. The apartment was spotless. Every surface gleamed. The dishes were done. The floors were vacuumed. Blake had even cleaned the bathroom, which he normally avoided like it might kill him. And there he was in the kitchen wearing an apron, pulling my favorite dinner out of the oven. He turned when he heard me come in and his face lit up with desperate hope. "You're home. I made dinner. Your mom's lasagna recipe." I just stared at him. This was Blake's standard move after major fights. Clean everything. Cook something special. Act like the perfect husband until I forgave him and things went back to normal. I'd fallen for it maybe a dozen times over 4 years. Not this time. I came to get some things. I'm staying at Heather's. Blake set down the lasagna and came toward me. "Please don't go. We need to talk about this. About counseling. About fixing our marriage. I'm not interested in the same conversation we've had 10 times before. This is different. I really understand now what I did wrong." "You don't. You understand that you got caught and faced consequences. That's not the same as understanding why what you did was wrong." He grabbed my hand. I told Carl everything. I explained that we're married and that I made a mistake by not being open about it. "I'm fixing this. You're doing damage control. That's different from actually respecting me. Rachel, please. I love you. We can work through this." I pulled my hand away. How many times have we had this exact conversation? How many times have you promised to do better and then gone right back to the same behavior? This time is different. It's not. You're just scared because the consequences actually affected you this time. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You spent 3 years erasing me because it was convenient for your career. Now that it's inconvenient to keep lying, suddenly you want to acknowledge I exist. But you're only doing it because you have to, not because you actually respect me. Blake's face went red. "I do respect you." "Then why did you introduce me as your roommate? Why did you tell people we were separated at the picnic? Why is your emergency contact listed as your neighbor instead of your wife?" "Because the company culture is complicated and I was trying to navigate it. By pretending I don't exist. I wasn't pretending you don't exist. I was just keeping my work life and personal life separate. You actively lied. You removed your ring. You flirted with Lindsay. You told your own brother I was your girlfriend instead of your wife. That's not separation, that's deception." We stood there in the kitchen with the lasagna getting cold between us. Blake looked exhausted and sad, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I need space. Real space. Not just a night at Heather's. I need time to figure out what I want without you cooking dinner and cleaning the apartment and performing being a good husband. How long? I don't know. Maybe we should try counseling. Just one session. If it doesn't help, then fine. Take all the space you need. But give us one real chance. I looked at him standing there in the apron with his perfect dinner and his spotless apartment and his desperate eyes. Part of me wanted to say no and walk out. But another part of me, the part that had loved him enough to marry him, wanted to believe that maybe this time could be different. Fine. One session. Blake's whole body relaxed. "Thank you. We'll find someone good. Someone who specializes in marriage counseling. A mediator, not a therapist. Someone neutral." He nodded eagerly. "Whatever you want, I'll set it up." I went to the bedroom and packed a bigger bag this time. More clothes, my work laptop, toiletries, books. Blake watched from the doorway but didn't try to stop me. "The counseling appointment is next week. Tuesday at 7. I'll text you the address." I zipped the bag and walked past him toward the door. Blake followed me. "Are you coming back? To the apartment?" "Eventually I'll need to. We need to figure out the lease and our stuff. But I'm not moving back in. Not right now." He looked like he wanted to argue but managed to stop himself. "Okay, whatever you need." I left him standing in the doorway and drove back to Heather's place. She was awake now and making coffee. "How'd it go with the lawyer?" "He says it'll take months even if Blake cooperates. Thousands of dollars. Complete financial chaos." She handed me a mug. And Blake made lasagna, cleaned the whole apartment, begged for counseling. Of course he did. I agreed to one session. She raised her eyebrows but didn't comment. When? Next week? Tuesday. Want me to come wait in the parking lot in case you need a quick exit? I smiled despite everything. Maybe. The next few days were strange. Blake texted constantly but kept it surface level. Hope you're doing okay. Thinking about you. Can't wait for Tuesday. He didn't push me to come home or demand we talk. For once, he seemed to understand that giving me space meant actually giving me space. On Monday, Blake came home from work looking shaken. I'd stopped by the apartment to get mail and found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. What happened? Jeremy Singh told everyone about Lindsay, about how I was flirting with her while pretending to be single. Now people think I was having an affair. Were you? Number. I was just being friendly. But Jeremy made it sound like I was actively pursuing her while lying about being married. I sat down across from him. Were you actively pursuing her? Blake's face went red. I was building a professional relationship. By telling her she looked gorgeous? By suggesting drinks just the two of you? That's not pursuing someone, that's networking. It's pursuing someone when you're pretending to be single. I wasn't pretending. I was just not mentioning. Blake, you told people you were single. You had it listed on your profile. You removed your ring. That's not just not mentioning. That's active deception. He put his head in his hands. Everyone at work thinks I'm a liar now. Jeremy told people I was making plans with Lindsay that excluded a spouse I claimed not to have. They think I'm a cheater. You are a liar. And you were making plans that excluded me. Because I thought you didn't exist in that part of my life. Blake looked up at me with genuine confusion on his face, like he couldn't understand why his coworkers were treating him differently now. They're calling me a backstabber. Jeremy is. He went behind my back and spread information that made me look bad. He told people the truth about what he witnessed. That's different from spreading information. It's the same thing. It's not. And you being angry at Jeremy for telling the truth is exactly the problem. You can't separate your actions from their consequences. You lied for 3 years and now people know you lied. That's not Jeremy's fault. It's yours. I left before the conversation could go in circles again. The counseling session on Tuesday was exactly as bad as I expected. We met at a mediator's office in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation place. The mediator was a woman named Amira, who had gray hair and the kind of patient smile that probably worked on couples who had normal marriage problems. Blake spent the first 30 minutes explaining the corporate culture at his company. How Carl favored single employees after his divorce. How being married was seen as a liability for advancement. How he'd just been trying to navigate a complicated professional environment. Amira listened and nodded and took notes. Then she looked at Blake with that patient smile. It sounds like you felt you needed to hide your marriage for career reasons, but I'm noticing that you're spending a lot of time explaining why you made that choice and not very much time talking about how that choice affected Rachel. Blake looked confused. I'm explaining the context. Context is important. Of course, but Rachel isn't here to understand your company's culture. She's here because she feels hurt and disrespected by your choices. Are you able to acknowledge that impact? I do acknowledge it. I've apologized. But she needs to understand why I did what I did. Blake, Amira said gently, it seems like you're more focused on justifying your choices than understanding their effect on your wife. That's not true. I understand she's upset. Upset is different from hurt. Upset is different from feeling erased and disrespected for 3 years. Can you speak to Rachel's actual experience rather than defending your decisions? Blake's face went red. This is exactly what I was worried about. You're biased against me. Everyone is acting like I'm some terrible person when I was just trying to succeed at work. I finally spoke up. You weren't just trying to succeed. You actively told people we were roommates. You called me your neighbor on emergency forms. You removed your wedding ring. You flirted with a coworker while pretending to be single. Those weren't necessary for career success. Those were choices you made to erase me. I was keeping my work life separate from my personal life. Lots of people do that. Separate is different from deception. You didn't just not mention me. You actively lied about being single. Blake turned to Amira. See? She's being dramatic. This is why we need help. We need someone to explain to her that what I did was normal workplace behavior. Amira's patient smile had disappeared. Blake, I need to be direct with you. What you did wasn't normal workplace behavior. You systematically misrepresented your marital status for 3 years. That's not the same as maintaining professional boundaries. It's strategic career management. It's lying to your wife, your employer, and your coworkers. And right now, you seem unable to distinguish between explaining your reasoning and taking responsibility for the harm you caused. Blake stood up. This is pointless. You're just going to take her side like everyone else. I'm not taking sides. I'm trying to help you see that your wife is telling you she felt erased and disrespected, and your response is to defend yourself rather than listen to her experience. I don't need to pay someone to tell me I'm a bad husband. Blake grabbed his jacket and walked out. Amira and I sat in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. Sometimes people aren't ready to do the work. I nodded. I knew he wasn't. But I needed to be able to say I tried everything. Amira looked at me with something like sympathy. You can't make someone respect you. They either do or they don't. And if they don't, no amount of counseling will fix that fundamental problem. I know. I left the office and sat in my car for a long time before driving back to Heather's apartment. Blake texted me that night saying the mediator was biased and we should find someone else who would actually be neutral. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The next day, Blake texted me suggesting we find a different counselor who would be more neutral and understanding of the situation. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking for someone to tell him he was right. I texted back that I didn't think counseling would work if he couldn't admit the basic problem. He called immediately, but I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to our apartment while he was at work and started packing more of my things. I took enough clothes for 2 weeks. My laptop, books, the framed photos of me and Heather from college. Blake came home early and found me loading boxes into my car. His face went white. Are you leaving me? I don't know yet. I just need space to think without you trying to convince me this is all normal. That's not fair. I'm trying to fix this. You're trying to make me believe your version where you didn't do anything wrong. Those aren't the same thing. Blake followed me to the car as I carried another box. Where are you going? Heather's. For how long? I don't know. Blake grabbed my arm, not hard but desperate. Please don't do this. We can work through it. I need to think clearly. I can't do that here with you telling me I'm overreacting every 5 minutes. I'm not trying to manipulate you. Yes, you are. You've been doing it for 3 years, telling me your lies were necessary, that I should understand, that I'm being dramatic. I'm tired of it. I loaded the last box and drove away while Blake stood in the parking lot watching. At Heather's apartment, I unpacked my things into her spare room and felt strange relief at having my own space. No wondering what Blake was telling people. No watching him take off his ring. Just quiet. Heather ordered pizza and we ate on her couch while I explained everything about the counseling session. She shook her head. He's never going to get it. He thinks he was smart, not cruel. I know. That's what scares me. 3 days later, Blake called me sounding shaken. Lindsay complained to HR. About what? About me. About how I acted at work. She told them I flirted with her while pretending to be single, and now she feels uncomfortable because everyone thinks she knew I was married. I didn't say anything. Blake continued. She said she feels misled, that she wouldn't have been friendly with me if she'd known. Did you flirt with her? It wasn't like that. You told her she looked gorgeous. You asked her to drinks. Just you and her. That was networking. While pretending to be single. That's the part you keep missing. I heard Blake's breathing on the other end. HR wants to meet with me tomorrow. Good. Maybe they'll help you understand what you did wrong. The next evening, Blake showed up at Heather's door looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Heather let him in but stayed in the room, making it clear he wasn't welcome to have a private conversation. Juliet from HR called me in for a formal meeting. Blake's voice was hollow. She had documentation. All the times I listed myself as single on company forms. My internal profile. Messages to Lindsay. They're putting a note in my file about misrepresenting my marital status and inappropriate workplace conduct. Are they firing you? Number. But Carl was there. He said my judgment is now in question. That lying about something this basic makes him wonder what else I might be dishonest about. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. You did this to yourself. You need to fix it. Can you call them? Tell them our marriage was fine? That I didn't do anything wrong? That you overreacted at the picnic? I stared at him. Number. Why not? Because you did do something wrong. You lied for 3 years. You flirted with a coworker while pretending to be available. Those are facts. I'm not going to lie for you. You're my wife. You're supposed to support me. Support goes both ways. You never supported me. You erased me. Blake's face turned red. So you're just going to let them ruin my career? You ruined your own career. I'm not your shield. Blake left without another word. The following weekend, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. I'd been avoiding telling them what was happening, but I needed their perspective. My mom opened the door and immediately knew something was wrong. Over pot roast, I explained everything. The 3 years of being called his roommate. The company thinking he was single. The flirting with Lindsay. The confrontation at the picnic. My dad put down his fork. I never liked how Blake talked about work like it existed in a separate universe from you. You noticed? Your mother and I both did. He'd talk about his job, his coworkers, his projects. Never mentioned you were part of his life. We thought it was odd but didn't want to interfere. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm not surprised you're considering leaving. What he did was disrespectful. I thought you'd tell me to work on the marriage, to give him another chance. Honey, some things can't be fixed with chances. He showed you who he is, someone who will erase you when it's convenient. That's not a partner. My dad cleared his throat. If you decide to get your own place, we'll help with moving expenses. First month's rent, deposit, whatever you need. I felt tears in my eyes. You're not disappointed in me? For what? For not making the marriage work? You can't make something work when the other person doesn't respect you. We're proud of you for recognizing that. The validation from my parents meant more than I expected. They weren't telling me to compromise or try harder. They were taking my side. 2 days later, Blake's mother called me. Rachel, what's going on? Blake says you're being unreasonable about some work situation. I took a deep breath and explained the whole pattern. The 3 years of being introduced as his roommate or neighbor. The company believing he was single. The deliberate choice to remove his ring and lie on official documents. Blake's mother was quiet for a moment. He's always been very focused on his career. That's different from lying about being married. I understand you're upset, but marriages take work. This isn't about me not working on the marriage. This is about Blake not acknowledging I existed. Blake's father got on the line. He'd been listening on speaker. Rachel, I need to apologize. What Blake did was wrong. His mother started to protest, but his father cut her off. No, Linda. What he described to us was keeping work and home separate. What Rachel is describing is systematic dishonesty. Those aren't the same thing. I raised him better than this. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you for understanding. Blake's father sighed. I don't know if you can forgive this. I don't know if I would. But I want you to know that what he did doesn't reflect how we raised him to treat his wife. After we hung up, I sat in Heather's spare room feeling emotionally exhausted, but also clearer about my decision. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments I could afford on my salary alone. The numbers were hard. Our current place was expensive, split between 2 incomes. On my own, I'd need to downsize significantly. Studio apartments in less convenient neighborhoods, older buildings without amenities. I made a spreadsheet of possibilities, calculating what I could manage with first month, last month, and deposit. It was doable but tight. I'd have to give up the nice gym, the covered parking, the updated kitchen. But as I looked at the listings, I realized I wasn't sad about the downgrade. I was relieved. These would be my spaces. No one would be removing wedding rings or lying about my existence. Small and modest felt better than spacious and dishonest. I bookmarked 6 apartments to visit and felt something like hope for the first time in weeks. This was investing in my self-respect, not losing something. Blake had been right that separation had financial costs. He'd just been wrong that the costs outweighed the benefits. The next morning, I was looking at apartment photos on my laptop at Heather's kitchen table when I heard the door unlock. Blake had a key to Heather's place from when he'd helped her move in last year. He walked in without knocking and saw my screen. You're apartment hunting. I closed the laptop. You can't just walk in here. This is Heather's place. I needed to talk to you. You've been avoiding my calls. Blake sat down across from me without being invited. His eyes were red. Are you really leaving me? I don't know yet. But I need to be prepared for that possibility. We've been married 4 years. You can't just throw that away. You threw it away when you spent 3 years pretending I didn't exist. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Blake. You made choices. Now I'm making mine. Blake's face crumpled and he started crying. Actually crying, not just tearing up. Please don't leave. I'll do anything. I'll tell everyone at work. I'll quit my job. I'll go to counseling every week. Just please don't go. I watched him cry and felt sad but also distant, like I was watching someone I used to know instead of my husband. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I even want to. Blake reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. You're grieving something, but I'm not sure if it's losing me or losing the marriage the way you wanted it. What does that mean? It means I don't know if you're sad about hurting me or sad about facing consequences. Those aren't the same thing. Blake wiped his eyes. I love you. I know I messed up, but I love you. Love isn't enough when there's no respect. And you didn't respect me enough to acknowledge I existed. Blake put his head in his hands and cried harder. I sat there feeling nothing except tired. I stayed at Heather's apartment for 3 more days before Blake finally stopped calling every hour. When I did go back to our place, He was waiting at the kitchen table with coffee made and breakfast laid out like some kind of peace offering. I sat down across from him and picked at the eggs while he watched me with red eyes. He started talking without me asking anything. He said he'd been thinking about everything, about why he did what he did, and he needed me to understand something. The single thing at work wasn't just about the promotion or Carl's preferences. He liked being seen as single. He liked walking into the office and having people see him as this guy with unlimited potential, someone exciting and dynamic instead of boring and tied down. The married guys at his company seemed dead inside to him, always talking about their kids' soccer games or their wives' opinions on home renovations. They seemed stuck. He wanted to be the guy people looked at and thought had possibilities, adventures ahead of him, not someone who went home to the same person every night. I put my fork down and just stared at him. So I made you boring. That's what you're saying. No, that's not what I meant. But it is what you meant. You wanted people to think you were available for whatever came along. You wanted to seem like you had options. Blake rubbed his face with both hands. When you say it like that, it sounds terrible. It is terrible. I asked him if he had a plan for this, like when was I supposed to become real in his work life. He said eventually when he was more established in the company, maybe in a few years, he would start gradually mentioning a wife. Gradually. Like he'd test the waters first to see if it hurt his image. He'd been thinking about it, had this whole timeline in his head for when I'd be allowed to exist. Maybe at the next level up, when he had more job security, then he could afford to be married. The fact that he'd actually planned it out made everything worse somehow. This wasn't just spontaneous lies to get ahead. He'd calculated exactly how long he could erase me before it became inconvenient for his career trajectory. I asked him how many years I was supposed to wait to be acknowledged. He didn't have an answer for that. Blake reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled back. He asked what he could do to fix this, his voice breaking. I told him I didn't know if it could be fixed because the problem wasn't just what he did. The problem was who he showed himself to be. He was someone who would erase me when it was convenient, and only acknowledge me when forced. How do you trust someone like that? How do you build a life with someone who sees you as a liability to their image? Blake started crying again, saying he never saw me as a liability. He loved me. He just made stupid choices because of work pressure. But it wasn't work pressure. It was his choice. Every single time he introduced me wrong or took off his ring or listed me as his neighbor, that was a choice. Hundreds of little choices over 3 years that all said the same thing. I wasn't worth the minor inconvenience of being honest. I called Cornelius the next morning and told him I wanted to move forward with separation paperwork. He scheduled a meeting for that afternoon at his office downtown. The waiting room had gray walls and motivational posters about new beginnings that felt too cheerful for what I was doing. Cornelius brought me into his office and pulled out a thick folder of documents. He explained we'd do a formal separation agreement first, dividing assets and establishing separate finances before filing for actual divorce. Our apartment lease was the biggest immediate issue since both our names were on it, and we had 6 months left. Our joint checking and savings accounts needed to be split. The car lease in both our names required either a buyout or refinancing. We had shared credit cards to close. 4 years of financial entanglement couldn't be undone quickly. Cornelius drafted the agreement over the next 2 hours, asking me questions about who bought what furniture and how much each of us contributed to savings. I tried to be fair even though part of me wanted to take everything just to hurt Blake the way he'd hurt me. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. Cornelius warned me that Blake might fight the agreement or drag out the process to avoid facing reality. Some people accepted separation quickly, and others spent months negotiating over coffee tables and dish sets because dealing with the paperwork meant accepting the marriage was really over. He asked if I thought Blake would cooperate. I didn't know. Blake had been unpredictable lately, swinging between desperate apologies and angry accusations. Cornelius printed out the separation agreement and put it in a folder for me to take home. Blake would need to sign it. Then we'd both need to get our own bank accounts and start the process of actually separating our lives. I took the folder and drove home feeling sick. This was real now. Not just fighting or staying at Heather's for a few days. This was legal paperwork that said our marriage was ending. Blake was home when I got there, working on his laptop at the dining table. He looked up when I walked in and saw the folder in my hands. His face went pale. What is that? Separation paperwork. We need to divide our assets and close the joint accounts. Blake closed his laptop. We're not doing this. Yes, we are. I've already made my decision. You can either cooperate with a fair division or make this harder on both of us, but the outcome will be the same. He stood up fast enough that his chair scraped across the floor. Rachel, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling every week. I'll quit my job if that's what you want. I don't want you to quit your job. I want you to have been honest about being married for the last 3 years. But I can't have that. So now we're here. Blake grabbed the folder from my hands and threw it on the table without opening it. I'm not signing anything. We're going to fix this. There's nothing to fix. You showed me who you are, and I believe you. Now we deal with the consequences. He picked up the folder then, finally looking at the papers inside. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. The division of our furniture and belongings, the closing of joint accounts, the formal end of our shared life laid out in legal language across 20 pages. He read for maybe 5 minutes before putting it down and walking out of the room. I heard our bedroom door close. For 3 days, the folder sat on the dining table untouched. Blake wouldn't talk about it. He'd come home from work and go straight to the bedroom or leave again to drive around. I stayed in the guest room and waited. On the 3rd night, he finally came out and sat at the table with a pen. He read through the whole agreement again, tried to negotiate a few changes about who got which pieces of furniture, then signed his name at the bottom of each page. He looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. His shoulders slumped. His face was gray. He slid the folder back to me without making eye contact. I signed my own name next to his and put the papers back in the folder. It was done. I started apartment hunting seriously the next day, looking at places I could afford on just my salary. Small one-bedroom units across town in older buildings. The numbers were tight but doable if I gave up the nice gym and covered parking and updated kitchen. I found a place after 2 weeks of searching. 600 square feet on the 3rd floor of a building built in the 70s. Brown carpet and white walls and a kitchen smaller than our current bathroom. But it was mine. Just mine. I signed the lease feeling scared and free at the same time. Heather helped me move my things on a Saturday when Blake agreed to stay away. We loaded my clothes and books and the furniture the separation agreement said was mine into a rented truck. Blake texted every 20 minutes asking if I was really doing this. I didn't answer. The apartment looked empty with just my stuff in it. My couch against one wall, my bookshelf in the corner, my dishes in the cabinets. Everything felt too small and too quiet. Heather ordered pizza and we ate sitting on the floor because I didn't have a dining table yet. She asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know, but I would be eventually. After she left, I sat alone in my new living room and cried. Not because I missed Blake exactly, but because 4 years of marriage had ended, and now I was here in this tiny apartment starting over. The first night was strange. I kept listening for Blake's sounds. His keys in the door, his footsteps in the hallway, the TV turning on in the living room. But there was nothing. Just silence and my own breathing and the sound of my upstairs neighbor walking around. I made tea and sat on my couch and realized I felt peaceful in a way our shared space never was. I didn't have to wonder if Blake was taking off his ring when he left for work. I didn't have to wonder how he was describing me to his coworkers. That constant low-level anxiety was gone. The absence of it felt like relief. Blake's work situation settled into a new normal over the next few weeks. He wasn't being promoted rapidly anymore, but he wasn't being pushed out either. Carl apparently told him his judgment would be under scrutiny for a while. The easy friendship Blake had with his team was replaced by polite distance. People were professional but not warm. Jeremy stopped inviting him to after-work drinks. The guys who used to ask Blake for career advice started going to other managers instead. Blake complained about it when he called me, said everyone was treating him like a liar even though he'd apologized. I pointed out that he was a liar and apologies didn't erase 3 years of deception. He hung up on me. Lindsay transferred to a different department about a month after the picnic incident. Blake called me furious, saying I'd ruined her career too. She'd been doing great on his team, and now she had to start over somewhere else because of the awkwardness I'd created. I didn't respond to that call, but Juliet from HR reached out to me a few days later. We met for coffee and she told me confidentially that Lindsay had requested the transfer herself. She felt uncomfortable after realizing Blake had been flirting with her while married. She hadn't known and felt like she'd been part of something wrong even though she was innocent. Other people in the office were giving her looks like she was a homewrecker, when really she'd just thought Blake was single like he'd told everyone. The transfer was her way of escaping the situation Blake had created. Juliet said the whole thing had been a mess for HR. They couldn't fire Blake for lying about his marital status, because that wasn't technically against company policy. But they'd made it clear his judgment was questionable, and his next performance review would reflect that. The consequences were rippling out beyond just Blake and me. Lindsay's career path had been disrupted. Jeremy felt uncomfortable at work now. The whole team dynamic had shifted. Blake had wanted to be seen as exciting and unlimited, and instead he'd created this situation where everyone saw him as dishonest and untrustworthy. I finished my coffee with Juliet and drove back to my small apartment feeling tired but also validated. I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive. What Blake did was wrong enough that it damaged multiple people's professional lives and personal relationships. The consequences were real, and they were his. I started therapy the following week. Moira Ridley had an office in a converted house with soft lighting and plants on every surface. She was maybe 50 with gray hair she didn't bother dyeing and glasses on a chain around her neck. I sat on her couch and told her the whole story. The 3 years of erasure, the company picnic, the separation. She listened without interrupting and then asked me one question. When did you first learn that making yourself smaller kept the peace? The question hit me like cold water. I thought about my childhood, my parents fighting constantly until my mom just stopped disagreeing with my dad about anything. The way she'd smile and nod when he made decisions for both of them. How she taught me that good wives don't make waves. Moira nodded like she'd heard this before. Blake didn't create that pattern. He just exploited it. Over the next few sessions, we unpacked how I'd spent years contorting myself to avoid conflict. Not just with Blake, but with everyone. My boss who took credit for my work. My friend group where I always agreed to plans I didn't want. Blake had seen that tendency and used it. He knew I'd accept being called his neighbor rather than cause a scene. That I'd tolerate being erased rather than make things awkward. Moira helped me see that my anger wasn't just about Blake's lies. It was about all the times I'd made myself invisible to keep someone else comfortable. The therapy was hard work. Moira gave me homework. Practice saying no to small things. Notice when I'm about to agree to something I don't want. Pay attention to the physical feeling of making myself smaller. I started tracking it in a journal and realized I did it constantly. At the grocery store when someone cut in line. At work when someone interrupted me in meetings. With my own parents when they asked invasive questions about my marriage. I was so practiced at disappearing that I barely noticed I was doing it anymore. Blake texted me 3 weeks into therapy asking if we could meet for coffee. Just to talk about next steps. I agreed, but picked a busy Starbucks near my apartment where we'd have to keep things calm. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He'd ordered my usual drink. The gesture felt manipulative rather than thoughtful. He looked different. Tired. Older somehow. Like the stress had aged him. He stood when he saw me, and I sat down across from him without hugging or touching. We stared at each other for a minute, and then he said he'd been doing therapy too. His company made it a condition of keeping his job. He had to do 6 sessions with their EAP counselor to address judgment issues. I sipped my coffee and waited. Blake said his therapist had been asking him questions he didn't have good answers for. Why did he think being married made him seem less capable? Where did that belief come from? He'd been thinking about it a lot, watching his dad growing up. His dad had been offered a big promotion that required relocation when Blake was 10. His mom said no because she didn't want to move the kids. His dad turned it down and stayed in the same position for 20 years. Blake remembered his dad talking bitterly about the guys who got ahead. They were always single or had wives who followed them anywhere. His dad said family held you back if you let it, made you boring, made you stuck. Blake had internalized that message. He'd been determined not to let family obligations limit his career, so he'd just pretended the family obligations didn't exist. He said it out loud like he expected me to understand, to validate the logic. I asked him if he realized how insulting that was, that he saw acknowledging me as a limitation rather than a normal part of being married. He nodded slowly and said his therapist had pointed that out too, that lots of married people advance professionally, that the problem wasn't having a wife, the problem was how he'd chosen to handle it. He'd created a false choice between career success and acknowledging me when he could have had both. I told Blake I appreciated him working through that with his therapist, understanding why he made those choices, but understanding why he hurt me didn't undo the hurt. It didn't rebuild the trust he'd destroyed over 3 years. He looked down at his coffee cup and said he knew that. For the first time in our entire relationship, he didn't try to defend himself or minimize what he'd done. He just sat there accepting it. We talked for another hour about practical things, the apartment lease, our bank accounts, the car we'd bought together. Blake said he thought we should file for divorce rather than staying separated forever. He'd already talked to a lawyer about the process. He wouldn't fight it or make it difficult. He'd sign whatever papers needed signing. Then he asked if there was any chance I'd consider trying again after some time apart. After he'd done more work on himself. After he'd proven he could change. I told him honestly that I didn't think so. That too much had been broken. That I didn't trust him anymore and didn't know if I ever could again. He nodded and his eyes got wet, but he didn't cry. He said he understood. That he'd destroyed something good because he was too focused on how things looked to other people. That he'd traded our marriage for career advancement, and now he had neither. I finished my coffee and stood up. Blake asked if we could stay in touch. Not as a couple, but as people who used to matter to each other. I said maybe eventually, but not right now. I needed space to figure out who I was without him. He walked me to my car and we stood in the parking lot for a minute. He said he was sorry again. That he knew it wasn't enough, but he meant it. I believed him. I just didn't care anymore. Sorry doesn't fix 3 years of being erased. Blake called me 2 weeks later with news. His company had announced a reorganization. They were eliminating his position entirely, creating a new structure with different roles. He'd been offered a lateral move to a different department with no pay increase. Or he could take a severance package. He was convinced it was punishment for the whole marital deception situation, that they wanted him gone but couldn't fire him outright. I called Cornelius to ask if that was legal. Cornelius said companies reorganize for lots of reasons: budget cuts, strategy changes, new leadership. But Blake might be right that his damaged reputation made him more vulnerable to being cut. When companies decide who stays and who goes, trustworthiness matters. Blake had shown poor judgment. That made him an easier choice to eliminate. Blake took the severance. 3 months of pay and benefits while he looked for something new. He spent 6 weeks applying to jobs and going on interviews. The market was tough. He'd been at his previous company for 6 years and his skills were specific to their systems. Other companies wanted people with broader experience. He finally got an offer from a smaller firm. Project manager role. 20% pay cut from what he'd been making before the promotion. He called to tell me about it and his voice was bitter. He said he'd sacrificed our marriage for career advancement and ended up damaging his career anyway. The irony wasn't lost on him. I felt a weird mix of things hearing that. Part of me felt bad for him. He'd lost his marriage and his job in the same summer. But part of me felt vindicated. Like the universe was showing him that consequences are real. That you can't just erase your wife for professional gain without something eventually breaking. I told him I was sorry he was going through that, but also that he'd made his choices. He'd prioritized appearing single over being honest. He'd flirted with coworkers while married. He'd lied to his boss and his team for years. Those choices had consequences. He said he knew. That he wasn't asking for sympathy. He just wanted me to know that he understood now. That the cost had been too high. We filed the divorce papers in late August. Cornelius handled everything on my end. Blake's lawyer sent over the proposed settlement, and it was fair. He didn't try to fight me on anything. We split our savings 50-50. I kept the car and took over the lease payments. He kept most of the furniture since I'd already moved out and bought my own stuff. The legal process was tedious and impersonal, reducing 4 years of marriage to spreadsheets and asset division forms. There was a mandatory waiting period, 60 days between filing and finalization. The state required it to make sure people weren't making hasty decisions. I spent those 60 days settling into my new life. My apartment felt like mine now instead of temporary. I'd painted the bedroom a soft blue, bought plants for the windowsills, hung pictures I'd chosen without asking anyone else's opinion. Work was going well. I'd gotten assigned to a big project that could lead to a promotion. My boss had noticed I seemed more confident lately, more willing to speak up in meetings. I didn't tell her it was because I wasn't spending all my energy managing Blake's ego anymore. Heather came over most weekends. We'd cook dinner and watch movies and talk about everything. She said I seemed lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. She was right. The constant low-level anxiety of wondering how Blake was describing me or whether he was wearing his ring had lifted. I didn't have to monitor his behavior anymore. Didn't have to correct his lies. Didn't have to fight to exist in his professional life. The relief of that was bigger than I'd expected. Jeremy reached out in early September. He sent me a message on LinkedIn asking if I'd be willing to meet for lunch. He wanted to apologize for any role he played in everything that happened. We met at a sandwich place downtown. Jeremy looked uncomfortable. He said he'd felt weird about Blake's behavior for months before the picnic incident. He'd watched Blake flirt with Lindsay while knowing Blake was married. Had listened to Blake make plans that excluded a spouse. Had seen Blake take off his ring before company events. It had made Jeremy uncomfortable, but he hadn't said anything because it wasn't his business. Then after the picnic, when everything came out, Jeremy had felt guilty. Like maybe if he'd said something earlier, things wouldn't have gotten so bad. I told Jeremy he didn't owe me an apology. He hadn't done anything wrong. Blake had lied to everyone, not just me. Lindsay thought Blake was single. Carl thought Blake was single. The whole company thought Blake was single because that's what Blake told them. Jeremy couldn't have fixed that. Only Blake could have fixed that by telling the truth. Jeremy seemed relieved. He said he was glad the truth came out even though the whole situation had been messy. That he'd always felt uncomfortable watching Blake present himself as available when he wasn't. That it felt dishonest in a way that bothered him. We finished lunch and Jeremy said if I ever needed a reference or a professional contact, he'd be happy to help. That he respected how I'd handled everything. I thanked him and we parted ways. It felt good to know that other people had seen Blake's behavior as wrong. That I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive. That what Blake did was bad enough that it made his coworkers uncomfortable too. Blake and I met one final time in October to sign the last divorce documents. Cornelius had arranged for us to meet at his office so everything would be official and witnessed. Blake arrived first. I saw him through the window sitting in the waiting area. He looked smaller somehow, less sure of himself. We went into the conference room and Cornelius laid out the papers. Pages and pages of legal language that boiled down to, "This marriage is over." We signed everywhere Cornelius pointed. Blake's signature was shaky on some of the pages. When we finished, there was a strange formality to it, like we were business associates completing a transaction rather than two people who'd been married for 4 years. Cornelius left us alone for a minute while he made copies. Blake asked how I was doing. I told him honestly that I was good, that I was building a life that felt authentic and mine, that I had an apartment I loved and work that challenged me and friends who supported me. He smiled, but it looked sad. He said he was glad, that he wanted me to be happy even if he couldn't be part of it. I asked how his new job was going. He said it was fine. Different from what he was used to. Smaller company meant less structure, but also less politics. His new boss didn't care about his marital status. Actually seemed to prefer that Blake was going through a divorce because it meant he understood work-life balance issues. The irony of that made us both almost laugh. Blake said he missed me. Not just the marriage, but me as a person. The way I'd always been calm when he was stressed. The way I'd listened to his work problems. The way I'd made our apartment feel like home. I told him I missed parts of our marriage too. The good parts before everything went wrong. But I didn't miss the person he'd become. The person who erased me. The person who valued career advancement over basic respect. He said he understood. Cornelius came back with the copies and we left separately. I walked to my car feeling strange. Not sad exactly, but not happy either. Just aware that a chapter had closed. That Blake and I were done in every official way. That whatever came next would be completely separate from him. Blake said he missed me. That he wished things had gone different. I believed him when he said it. The way his voice cracked on certain words felt real. But believing his regret didn't change what he'd done. He spent 3 years making careful choices to erase me. Those weren't accidents or mistakes. They were decisions that showed me what mattered to him. His career came first. His image came second. I came somewhere after that. Maybe third, maybe lower. The regret he felt now didn't undo those 3 years of being called his roommate or his neighbor or just Rachel. It didn't undo the wedding ring in his jacket pocket, or the single status on his work profile, or the flirty messages to Lindsay. Regret was just him feeling bad about consequences. It wasn't the same as actually respecting me enough to acknowledge I existed. The divorce finalized in early October. 3 months after the company picnic where everything blew up. Cornelius called to tell me the judge had signed everything. It was done. Legally over. I sat in my apartment after the call and felt this weird mix of emotions. Sad for what I'd hoped our marriage would be. The partnership I thought we had. The future I'd imagined. But also relieved. So relieved. I wasn't in a relationship anymore where I had to fight just to be acknowledged. Where I had to wonder how Blake was introducing me or if he was wearing his ring. Where I had to see myself listed as his neighbor in emergency contacts. That weight lifted. The divorce papers arrived a week later in a manila envelope. Official stamps and signatures making it real. I filed them in a folder and put the folder in my desk drawer. Closed that chapter physically. Heather threw me a divorce party 2 weeks later. She invited our close friends to her apartment, decorated with silly banners that said things like, "Freedom looks good on you," and "Single and loving it." We drank wine and ate too much cheese, and it felt good. Cathartic. We were celebrating my freedom instead of mourning the marriage. People started sharing stories about Blake's weird behavior. Times they'd noticed but hadn't said anything. My friend Amy said she always thought it was strange that Blake never posted about me on social media. Like I didn't exist in his online life. My friend Jason said he ran into Blake at a bar once, and Blake introduced himself as single when talking to some women at the next table. Jason had been confused because he knew Blake and I were married, but he figured maybe Blake was joking or being weird. Another friend said she'd met Blake's coworkers at a restaurant once, and they seemed shocked to learn Blake had a wife. Like it was news to them. Hearing all these stories made me realize other people saw the disrespect. I hadn't been crazy or too sensitive. Blake's behavior had been obvious enough that friends noticed and felt uncomfortable. They just hadn't known how to bring it up. I got a promotion at work in late October. Senior account manager, better title, decent raise. My boss called me into her office to tell me. She said it was based on the client project I'd finished in August. But then she added something that stuck with me. She said I seemed more confident lately, more present in meetings, more willing to speak up with ideas. I realized she was right. Not constantly managing Blake's ego had freed up mental space. I wasn't spending energy wondering if he was taking off his ring at work or checking his company's social network for flirty comments. I wasn't bracing for the next time he'd introduce me wrong or lie about our relationship status. That mental energy went back into my own work, my own goals, my own professional growth. The timing felt symbolic even though the promotion was based on work from months ago. Like my life was improving in multiple ways now that Blake wasn't in it. Blake sent me a long email in early November. It would have been our 5th wedding anniversary. The email was several paragraphs of apology, saying he understood now how much he'd hurt me, how wrong his choices had been, how he hoped I'd find someone who treated me the way I deserved, someone who'd be proud to call me his wife, someone who wouldn't hide me or erase me or pretend I didn't exist. The words seemed genuine. I read the email twice, appreciated the sentiment, but I didn't respond. Cornelius had told me I didn't have to maintain contact with Blake now that the divorce was final. We had no kids, no shared property left to divide, no reason to keep talking. I realized closure wasn't something Blake could give me by apologizing again. Closure was something I created for myself, by building a new life, by choosing to move forward, by recognizing that his regret didn't obligate me to forgive him or stay connected. I went on a few dates in November. Nothing serious, just testing the waters. Heather set me up with a guy from her gym. We had coffee. He was nice enough. Talked about his work as an engineer. Asked about my job. When he mentioned his ex-girlfriend to explain why he'd moved to the city, he called her his ex-girlfriend right away. No hesitation. No hiding the relationship. Just straightforward honesty about his past. Another date was with a friend of Jason's. We met for drinks. He showed me photos on his phone of his family, including pictures of him with his ex-wife at his sister's wedding. He talked about her normally. Acknowledged she'd been part of his life. Didn't try to erase or minimize the relationship. The contrast with Blake hit me hard. These were normal men who introduced their partners honestly, who didn't hide relationships or pretend to be single, who treated the women they dated like actual people who existed. Blake's behavior had been so far outside normal that even casual dates reminded me how much I'd been settling. How much disrespect I'd accepted as normal because Blake convinced me it was necessary. I kept seeing Moira every 2 weeks, working through the anger and hurt that still came up sometimes. She helped me understand why the erasure felt so devastating. It wasn't just about Blake lying to his coworkers. It was about him sending me the message that I wasn't worth acknowledging, that my existence was inconvenient, that I was less important than his image or his career advancement. Moira said being erased attacks your sense of self-worth in deep ways, makes you question if you matter at all. We worked on rebuilding that sense of worth, learning that being alone was better than being with someone who made me feel invisible, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Self-preservation. I was learning to trust my own judgment again, to recognize disrespect when I saw it instead of making excuses or minimizing it. I ran into Lindsay at a coffee shop in mid-November. She was in line ahead of me, recognized me, and her face went red. We had this brief, awkward conversation while waiting for our drinks. She apologized for any part she played in the situation with Blake, said she felt terrible about the whole thing. I told her she didn't do anything wrong. Blake misrepresented himself to her, too. She was another person he lied to. She seemed relieved to hear me say that, like she'd been carrying guilt about it. We got our coffees and went separate ways. The interaction was uncomfortable, but also kind of healing. Lindsay wasn't the enemy. She'd been manipulated by Blake just like I had, just in a different way. My parents called in late November to talk about Thanksgiving plans. They invited me to their house for the holiday. Then my mom mentioned they hadn't invited Blake even though they were still friendly with his parents. She said it carefully, like she was worried about hurting my feelings. But I was touched by their clear loyalty. They'd chosen my side, made it obvious they supported me. My dad got on the phone and said he was proud of me, for knowing my worth, for not accepting treatment that made me smaller, for choosing to leave instead of staying in a marriage where I had to fight for basic respect. Hearing my dad say he was proud made me tear up. I'd been worried my parents would be disappointed about the divorce, would think I should have tried harder. But they saw what Blake did as unacceptable. They validated my decision to leave. I was scrolling through social media in early December when Blake's profile showed up in my feed. He'd posted a photo with a woman I didn't recognize, her arm around his waist, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at a restaurant. The caption said something about great company and new beginnings. So he was dating someone already. 4 months after our divorce finalized. Maybe they'd been together longer. Maybe this was someone he met at his new job. I felt this pang of something. Not quite jealousy. More like sadness for whoever she was. I hoped Blake had learned from our marriage failing, that he'd treat her better, introduce her honestly, acknowledge her existence. But I suspected old patterns were hard to break. He'd probably already started making the same choices. prioritizing his image over her dignity. I closed the app and didn't look at his profile again. I booked the beach trip on a Wednesday. 3 days in late October at a small coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. Blake used to say beach vacations were boring without activities planned. No zip lines or jet skis meant wasted time to him. I packed a bag with books I'd been meaning to read and comfortable clothes. Told my boss I was taking a few personal days. Drove 4 hours to a rental cottage that sat 50 yards from the water. The first morning I woke up without an alarm and made coffee on the tiny stove. Walked down to the beach in my sweatshirt and bare feet. The sand was cold and damp. I sat on a piece of driftwood and watched the waves for an hour. Just sat there. No phone. No agenda. No wondering what Blake was telling people about me or how he was describing our relationship status to strangers. The quiet felt strange at first, like I should be doing something productive. But I stayed there anyway. Let myself just exist without purpose or performance. I spent 3 days reading on the porch, walking the beach at different times to see how the light changed, eating whatever I wanted without considering someone else's preferences. One afternoon, I drove to a little bookstore in town and browsed for 2 hours. Bought 4 novels without checking the prices or justifying the purchase. That night, I read in bed until midnight with all the lights on because there was nobody to disturb. The peace of it surprised me. Not the absence of Blake specifically, but the absence of that constant low-level monitoring. Not tracking how I was represented. Not bracing for the next introduction where I'd be downgraded to neighbor or friend or nothing at all. When I got back home, Heather came over with Thai food. She took one look at me and said I seemed different. Lighter somehow. More like my old self from college before I met Blake. I realized she was right. The tightness in my chest that I'd gotten so used to had loosened. That feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Wondering when Blake would erase me next, or how he was presenting himself to his coworkers. It had lifted. Replaced by something simpler. Just being fully myself without editing or shrinking or accommodating someone else's image management. Heather said I was smiling more, talking faster, taking up more space in conversations instead of carefully measuring my words. I hadn't noticed, but she was right about that too. In November, I started volunteering with a women's support group that met at the community center on Tuesday evenings. The facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share their experience. I talked about being systematically erased in my marriage, how my husband introduced me as his roommate and neighbor and friend for 3 years, how he removed his wedding ring at work and listed himself as single on company systems, how I spent years making excuses for it until I finally couldn't anymore. 3 other women spoke up after me. One woman's boyfriend refused to post photos of them together on social media because he wanted to appear available to other women. Another woman's husband never mentioned her to his family for 2 years. A third woman's partner introduced her as his assistant when they ran his business together. Different details, but the same core pattern. Being diminished, made smaller, erased when convenient. Helping them name what was happening to them felt meaningful. Like taking something painful I'd been through and using it to help someone else recognize their own situation more clearly. 6 months after the company picnic where everything exploded, Blake's career recovered to a new baseline, and I built a life that was completely mine. My apartment had furniture I picked out myself. Plants on the windowsill that I watered without anyone commenting on the mess. A kitchen where I could cook at midnight if I wanted. Work projects I was proud of that nobody dismissed as less important than their own career. Friends who knew me as just Rachel. Not Blake's wife or Blake's ex-wife. Just me. The divorce still hurt sometimes when I thought about what I'd hoped our marriage would be. The betrayal left marks that therapy was helping me process. But I was happy. Genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been during those 3 years of being erased. That happiness felt like proof I'd made the right choice. Like evidence that leaving was better than staying with someone who made me fight for basic acknowledgement. The life I was building wasn't perfect, but it was fully mine, and that made all the difference.